Is APRA's latest move a one-off, or is this the start of tighter rules that could reshape investor borrowing? I'm Tim Graham, and the Property Playbook starts now. Today I'm joined at the desk by Cameron Kusher, Research and Development Lead at Hotspotting. Cameron's going to help us decode what's really happening behind the headlines. We're diving into APRA's recent decision to cap high debt-to-income lending from next year and the recent moves by major lenders to tighten trust and self-managed super fund lending. We'll explore what this really means for property investors and what impact, if any, it may have on real estate markets across the country. Cameron, how are you?
I'm well, thanks, Tim.
Welcome back to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That's the way. Why don't we start? Tell us, what are these most recent changes by APRA and what do they really mean?
So the most recent change is a macro-prudential policy change, and what it is doing is limiting high debt-to-income lending to 20% of all new lending. Mm-hmm. That's across every single borrower. So anyone that wants to borrow more than 6 times their income, they're going to be potentially clamped down on by this. Now the thing about it though is that at the moment only about 6% of all lending is above 6 times debt to income ratio. So realistically it's probably not going to impact the market very much. I think it's more of an early warning shot from APRA to say, you know, we're seeing some things that we don't really like, and you know, you guys need to tighten up your lending. Because it is at an individual level individual lender level, we possibly might see some lenders have to rein in that lending that are going, you know, well above that that limit. But for the most part, lending is well below that limit. Okay, so it obviously demanded a lot of the headlines in recent weeks, but it seemed like it was a bit of a storm in the teacup. It was, you know, maybe made out to be a little bit more serious than it may possibly be. Would that be a fair statement? I think so. I mean, we have seen high debt-to-income lending above those levels in the past, but it's nowhere near it at the moment. I think it's more just a case that APRA's out there saying, hey, remember us, remember to, you know...
Remember what I did last time.
Yeah, remember what I did last time, remember to lend responsibly, and we won't have to do any more. But I do think it could be a precursor to other changes that they might make through 2026. Okay, so we might not see anything that's going to be a dramatic change to most households immediately, but it is, as you say, a bit of a warning to say, you know, if we don't start to see things start to cool a little bit in this space, there could be more repercussions, I suppose. Exactly, and I mean the people that it's going to really hit are first home buyers. At the same time, you've got the government, you know, letting first home buyers borrow with a 5% deposit. They're taking on a lot of debt to purchase those homes, and obviously investors that own several properties, they're probably going to be the ones hitting up against that debt to income limit. Let's talk about investors for a moment and some of the investor data, because we've seen loans to investors spike increasingly every month over the last couple of quarters at least. So we're seeing a lot more activity in the market. Do you think this is going to be aimed specifically at investors, that it's going to try to curb them? I think if we continue to see an acceleration in that investor credit growth, so if you look in September, it grew by 7.3% over the past year, and then in October it was up 7.9%. So it's accelerating at a pretty fast pace. That's the fastest rate of growth in investor credit since back in 2015. And 2015 was the last time they were clamping down on investors. So I think if it continues to accelerate, we'll probably see more limits on lending to investors, and that will probably take the form of cracking down on the availability of interest-only loans, and potentially, like they did last time, a speed limit on investor credit growth. Okay. And then another thing that we've seen happen in recent times is we've seen a bit of a clamp down on the type of lending, and even some lenders leaving the space in terms of lending to trusts and lending through self-managed super funds. I think a lot of this has been largely driven by Ben Kingsley at PICA, who I obviously sit on the board with, and you know, a lot of this is really aimed at a lot of the spruiking that's been seen online now. People going out and saying you can have unlimited borrowing capacity and things like that. So what do you sort of see in this space at the moment, and is it something that they're going to completely rule out? We're no longer doing trust, we're no longer doing self-managed super fund, or do you think they're just starting to ease back a little bit, and maybe some other lenders might step in? I think they're starting to ease back a little bit. Obviously, Macquarie and CBA have been the two big ones that have cracked down, and you'll probably see some of the larger banks follow suit. I don't think that the smaller lenders would necessarily want to crack down on that, because that gives them a point of difference, and obviously it's always quite challenging for the smaller lenders to compete with the bigger lenders. So if they're stepping out of a space, those smaller lenders might step in. But I do think it is, you know, there is a lot of spruiking out there that, you know, you just borrow through a trust and you can do all of these things. I don't see that anyone's really going to exit that space entirely, but I think that they really want to crack down on that lending that is happening in that space. And I guess the perception that you just chuck it in a trust or you borrow through your self-managed super fund and you can do whatever you want. That's obviously a pretty bad perception.
Well, it is, but it's also where is this advice coming from? And a lot of the time it's unlicensed advice to go and set up these trusts and to go and set up these self-managed super funds by people that haven't got the accreditations to be giving that type of advice.
Exactly right. So I think it's probably more representative of a broader issue with some of the advice out there about how you invest in property, and that's maybe what should be being cracked down on rather than the lending. Yeah,
that's what I would have thought. Now, this is where APRA, as much as we don't want to see this big axe drop against investors or against property investment in general, we don't really want them to be stepping in and getting too involved, but at the same time, that's probably where they need to be keeping an eye. Yeah,
it's probably up to APRA and ACCC and people like this and ASIC to step in and start reining in some of the advice that's being given freely. I mean, it doesn't take a lot of, it's pretty easy to go out there on social media these days and advise people how to do things, but you are giving financial advice, and I think there should probably be tighter regulations around that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's pivot a little bit and start talking about our housing target. We've got the $1.2 million target in terms of how many houses we can build. Are we on track?
We're not on track. At the moment, we're looking like over the 5 years, we'll probably build somewhere around 950,000. Keep in mind that the federal government originally announced a target of 1 million, and then they upped it to 1.2 million.
It's a stretch goal.
It is a stretch goal, and they keep pushing out the time frame. It was June 2029, and now I see them saying it's 2030, etc. So, look, it was always going to be a very tough ask. I mean, to be honest, perfectly frank with you, when they announced it, I thought there was no chance that they were going to do it. And that's largely because the cycle's working against new housing construction. We've just come through a period where construction costs have surged more than they've surged in about 30 years. Interest rates have been highest they've been in 10 years. That makes it harder to deliver new housing. And you've got this big gap between the cost of a new home and the cost of an existing home. So people are choosing to buy an existing home because it's a lot cheaper. When we did have a lot of new housing construction going on, that gap was narrow. Construction costs had been very stable for a long period of time, and interest rates were low and they were falling. We just don't have those situations at the moment.
It's quite the opposite, you're right. So one other thing that I know that you've been talking about a lot online on LinkedIn and things is the recent report that was released by the Grattan Institute. Is there any findings in there that you think carry some weight and could actually help with this target?
Oh, look, I think what we need to do is deliver more housing, and relaxing zoning laws and things like that definitely help. But I think there's a bit of an assumption that you just relax zoning laws and then everyone comes and builds. The problem is for developers, it still needs to stack up, and most developers will look for a margin of 20%. If you can't get that 20% margin, it's not worth their while going ahead and constructing. So I think whilst everyone talks a lot about zoning restrictions and improving the planning system, which is definitely something we need to do, it's also about making new development more feasible, and that's about the costs involved, financing of it, all of these things. So planning rules are part of it, but there's a much broader conversation about how do we deliver housing at a reasonable price that someone's going to buy. Because remember, in Australia, most new projects don't get up without a level of pre-sale. And you've got to get 50-60% of it sold before it's going to go ahead. And when prices are more expensive than existing homes, a lot of people just aren't going to be willing to pay those prices, and then the project's not going to go ahead.
That's right. So you can remove the red tape, you can rezone things, but if the projects don't stack up, they're still not going to build. Developers aren't going to go out there and start to build things at a loss.
No, exactly right. And I think that's one of the things, if we go back to the sort of 2015 to 2020 when we were building a lot of new housing, the government allowed all, off-the-plan sales, more than 50% of those, up to 100% of a new off-the-plan project to be sold offshore. Now only 50% can be sold offshore. There's obviously been quite a crackdown of investors over that second half of the 2010s as well. Most new apartment projects in particular rely heavily on investors buying into those properties. And if you don't have investors buying into those properties, a lot of them are just not going to go ahead.
Well, I mean, they haven't made it easy for offshore investors either with the additional stamp duties and things like that. So, for them, it's not stacking up either.
No, exactly right. And it's an interesting discussion, because you look at we're trying to grow this build to rent business model. that's all financed by offshore capital. Those properties never become available for sale here. So we're happy for offshore capital to own a whole building, but we're not happy for offshore capital to own a whole building if it's individually sold to offshore investors. It seems quite off. I've
always thought that if you want to limit the barriers to entry for a developer to get a project off the ground, why don't we give the developer some relief on stamp duty? Because every time they go into a project, they're actually creating lots more stamp duty and lots more council rates every time they do that. So remove that barrier to a developer getting into the market, and all of a sudden we'll see a lot more projects get off the ground.
It makes sense. I mean, the government is going to get stamp duty revenue. The local government's going to get rates revenue off all of those properties over time. So if you can remove that stamp duty impost, obviously the big one though is infrastructure charges.
That's right.
And a lot of that charge gets put on the developer, and also just how long it takes to get approvals. The longer you're holding that land before you can develop it, the more it's going to cost you. So we need to fix a lot of things wrong with the housing market and with housing approvals. Planning is part of it, but there's a lot more to it than just that.
Are we seeing any states getting it right?
Look, I think some of the states like New South Wales and Victoria are making good steps. Again, though, they're very much focused on the planning process and upzoning inner city areas and areas around public transport. But they're not really focused on the biggest issue for developers, which is actually making this thing feasible. So I think they need to look at how they charge, what they charge, and if we're serious about hitting these targets, if we're serious about making housing in Australia more affordable, quite simply we need to build more. So you need to talk to developers and understand what is it going to take for you to be able to deliver more housing. And planning's part of it, but there's a lot of other things as well.
Okay. Well, finally, if you were sitting at around the table with some policymakers, what advice would you give them to try to hit this target? Is there any? I know there's no silver bullet, but what could we be doing better?
I think what we need to be doing better is actually talking with the industry and understanding how we're going to deliver more housing. And you go and talk to people.
You're asking for consultation. They don't.
They like to tell us what to do, not to consult with us. But I think they really need to look at how do we get it to a position where developers can make that 20% margin, and do we need to lower our fees and charges? Can we fast track development approvals, which a lot of the talk is about at the moment? Can we lower infrastructure fees and charges on new development? Can we zone more greenfield land? Because not everyone wants an inner city apartment. A lot of people want houses as well. So you've got to have enough land to develop. And also, can we look at delivering a lot of the infrastructure we need ahead of time? Because a lot of people want greenfield housing, but they're deterred because major roads don't go in until well into the project. If you're the first one into these projects, you don't have a lot of amenity in that local area. So I think these are
by the time everybody moves in, there's one road in, one road out, and you can't get to work without a 3-hour commute.
Exactly. So these are the things they really need to be thinking about.
Very good. Cameron Kusher, appreciate your insights as always, my friend. Thank you. Well, folks, that's the play for today. This program's been brought to you by hotspotting.com.au. This is Ticker. We'll be right back.